From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. An extended visit with K-State's Glynn Tonsor. Glynn will go over the latest USDA cattle on feed report, and he'll review the very latest numbers on domestic and export beef demand, that part of the weekly cattle market segment. Then Glynn takes on two added topics, changes taking place in the beef packing sector nationally, and he'll talk of a new tool he helped create to calculate the net economic returns of various calf vaccination programs. Later on, we'll have this week's 4-H segment, Jeff Wickman talking with Beth Hinshaw about 4-H'ers gearing up on their individual project work as spring is now here. All that and more next on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome once again to another Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network. Glad to have you aboard. And as promised during our first half hour, an extended visit with livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension, for we've a bevy of things that we wanted to cover this time around with Glynn. Of course, our regular cattle market segment and added material as we move ahead here. Glynn, let's start with the customary look back at the trades this past week, cash and futures. The tone there seemed to be more or less holding even with what we've seen in recent weeks.
Yeah, not a lot of new news, so to speak, about, at least in the markets. We'll get to some of the other new news later here, as you said, but let's just break down the numbers first. So the cash trade, AMS called the Fed cattle trade light volume, right at 114, steady for the week, as we've been saying for a few weeks now. When you flip over to feeder cattle cash, the Pratt market, USDA, they put out a range of 149 to 158 for the 6 to 7 weight class, and then fell down a fair amount. The 7 to 8 weight class is 134 to 137. The volume is back up, at least in the Pratt market, compared to winter effect a few weeks earlier. How does that compare to the board? So the April live cattle contract closed at about 118.5, down about 50 cents for the week. So as you said, sort of flat there. And then March feeder cattle was 134.5, down $2 for the week. I think it's worth noting that we had some mixed signals from the wholesale meat market. So the choice cutout closed Friday at $2.30. That was up almost $5 for the week, down about $10 from where we were at the end of February. So it's been bouncing around the last several weeks. Select, however, was flat. So Select came in at $2.20, no big change from the week before. As a pause, that puts the Choice Select spread at $10. I'd been monitoring that for a few weeks. It had been weakening when we want it to widen by seasonal patterns. Not to get too far off track here, but it would be nice to see the Choice Select spread widen as a signal of quality demand as the country's opening up, so to speak, and hopefully there's a boost in choice beef demand through restaurants and so forth. We'll be watching that. And choice going up and select not is consistent with that this past week, is why I highlight that. It's worth monitoring in the weeks ahead.
So do you anticipate choice pushing forward as you're describing there?
I anticipate restaurant demand to improve over the next several months, and potentially with that, if the sit-down meals component of that, particularly dinner meals, is core as opposed to fast casuals and so forth, then I would expect maybe Prime and Choice to both improve compared to Select. And seasonally, we expect that anyhow. Also, it's somewhat of a safe prediction because of that normally, but we haven't seen that the last few weeks. So that's why it's a mixed signal in the market that's worth monitoring. We did see a $5 widening in the Choice Select spread this past week. To be more clear, yes, I do anticipate that to happen more in the next few weeks. If it doesn't, it concerns me what that means.
You do keep track of how processing of beef is going, and this has been something to watch ever since the pandemic set in. We're pretty much back on the regular beam, aren't we, there?
We are, and I do it not just because of pandemic. There's ongoing confusion and discussion in that space, as that's the reason I track it all the time, make sure I have the numbers in front of me, but also the weather events in February is a more recent one. So yes, the initial estimates that include Saturday for this past week put us at 624,000 head FI cattle slaughter. That would be down from 647 the week before, about 660 a year earlier, so both are down. But importantly, they are well up from, it was 549 is what I wrote down for the week in February that was hit most by the weather. Mm-hmm. So, to paraphrase, we've bounced back from the weather hit, right? That was in the grand scheme, a logistical pause on the ability to convert cattle just because Mother Nature was rough there for a week or 10 days. And I do think the aftermath of that is largely behind us. It sets the stage for the cattle and feed report, which we're probably going to talk about next.
Indeed. So the weather in February did leave something of a mark on the cattle and feed numbers, somewhat benign, but was there nonetheless.
It did. The first effect would be is it added uncertainty to this report. So going into it, there's always a wide range on both placements and marketings for those that follow the report. But I'd argue there was even more uncertainty going into it because we weren't sure exactly what the weather did to the feedlot sector. What was reported by USDA this past Friday, March 1st inventories are up 1.5%. That was right in line with expectations, so there's no surprise. The trade saw that coming, so to speak. February placements came in at 1.9% below 2020. That was compared to a expected decline of 2.5%. So let's put that in the bucket of a small surprise. So placements fell as expected, but they didn't fall quite as much as expected. One way to interpret that is maybe feed yards managed for the month as a whole to not let weather hold them back on getting cattle placed. That's probably what went on there. I think the week of the weather being the worst, no doubt it was an issue, but maybe leading into it in the last week after that, there was some cattle movement that made up for that. Round this out, the February marketings came in at 2.4% below 2020, spot on with what was expected, no big surprise. Put a bow around that. I don't see this report as a market mover. I don't think there's a big shock in here. And again, sometimes that's okay. We've had an awful lot of angst and anxiety in the marketplace for months. Boring reports are okay at times. We need to remember that.
Yeah, no news is good news.
No news is good news sometimes. Yeah. And it affirms we managed to keep cattle moving roughly what we thought. So Mother Nature didn't create a multi-week hiccup. Too bad is the way I interpret that.
When you come over, Glynn, we always like to talk of your latest projections on returns to finishing cattle out. February was pretty rough, as the numbers would depict, but it sounds as if there will be positive numbers showing up until fall from here forward.
Yeah, so these numbers, they're on our Ag Manager website, updated monthly. They were done, the most recent edition was as of March 9th, because it's a monthly effort. At the moment, the months of March through September, the projected closeouts are positive, so projections to sell a steer in each of those months are positive. The best month being projected is cattle coming out of yards in May. 137 per steer is the number that's there. Why is that month the highest? That is the month that has the highest projected sale price. So again, at the time I did this, the projected cash sales price was $128. That stems from the futures being at just below $120, $119.60 to be specific, but a very strong basis. So $9 basis, which we have not seen in recent weeks. We'll see if that develops seasonally. I use historic basis in this exercise, so past year's basis is what's going on there. But we will certainly need to see not only the board hold up, but basis strengthen in order for that 137 to be realized. But that is the high water mark in the next several months. Several of those months are close to break even, right? So when I say they're positive, they're $5 positives. But we get all the way out to October closeouts before I'm projecting a loss. And that is a nice thing to say because we had several months in a row to where throughout a good chunk of 2020 where we had triple-digit negative losses for those that were not hedged.
There is, though, that caution flag in the fall in October where returns turn negative to a fairly notable extent, don't they?
There is.
Potentially.
Yeah, and there's cautions all the time if you talk to Glynn and let him have the mic, right? But the biggest concerns I would have on these returns would be is, one, does demand falter more than we expect? I'm optimistic that food service trade will sort of pivot in and carry some weight in 2021. I'm also optimistic that exports will recover. We're going to talk about export demand in a moment, but there's notable risk with both of those, and we're sort of counting on a normal feed crop that certainly could change the cost of gain on all these stories. That's nothing new. None of those three are new to cattlemen who are used to placing cattle on feed, but please keep your eye on all those factors.
Let's go right to your latest demand numbers. You do manage that meat demand monitor monthly, and you have new numbers expected.
Yeah, so we're sitting here doing this in March. The March numbers will come out soon. To paraphrase what I anticipate to show up in there, and I'm setting the stage for this in my earlier comments, is there's a lot of commentary, states that have formally opened up, and I use Texas as my example, but not only Texas, open for business, foot traffic is up, comments about hotel occupancies are up, restaurant activity is up, and the like. I anticipate that to spill across other states. Consumer vaccination rates are up, on and on. Well, with that, hopefully, beef's demand and more generally meat demand through the food service channel will be improving. Hopefully, not just cannibalizing retail demand. Watching that shift off, hopefully there's a net gain, not just a one-to-one shift. That's going to be really important to watch, and we'll get a first look at that in the March Meat Demand Monitor. So look for that in the days ahead, like you said. That said, we got to go backwards a little bit to use what is available. So another measure I use is driven by USDA data, and the latest is for January. So we can compare to what December looked like domestic demand. And domestic beef demand in January was up 1% compared to December. Pork was up 4% compared to December, and chicken was off 5% compared to December. There's a holiday effect embedded in all that, and of course it was cold, right? We weren't sitting outside in patios, so forth, so there's seasonal stuff going on too. The more relevant update, I think, is really the export side. So again, I also maintain export demand indices, and for January, beef demand export-wise was down 17% compared to December. Pork was down 9%, and chicken was up 2%. I made a note here to remind everybody, I think a lot of it has to do with logistical challenges. So there's been a lot of commentary in the meat and livestock space about our supply chain, right? The bottleneck about being able to convert animals into meat. Many supply chains are struggling. There's commentary now about, auto manufacturers can't get chips, so we're not making cars at the same clip. There's a lot of commentary about barges that are off the coast, right? Can't get into the LA port and so forth. Logistically, we have bottlenecks in many parts of our economy that is not unique to meat production. And just being able to get ships going from the U.S. to Asia and vice versa is essential, pun intended, to sustain and build meat exports. And I think we're living through a major hiccup on that. I think there's reasons to be optimistic that will improve, but I think a big reason that those January numbers were negative like they were was exactly that, is we couldn't do business as much as we wanted to, because I think the Asian economies in particular would like more of our meat, but you got to get it to them.
We're going to turn the page after the break and talk of added items of interest to you cattle producers, including a new tool out of K-State to help you figure out the returns to your calf vaccination programs. That's next as we're visiting on Agriculture Today with livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. In the guest chair once more is livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension. And continuing on now with Glynn, as we profile for you something that you cow-calf producers and others will find potentially very useful, at least that's the intent. K-State, and Glynn contributing to this, has now put out a calf vaccination program assessment tool. Glynn, the purpose behind this, the title probably captures the better part of it, but what did you and K-State's Dave Renter team up to provide here?
Yeah, so Dave Renter's over in the vet school. Some of our listeners are aware of his program as well. We partnered basically to build this Excel-based decision tool to hopefully help mainly cow-calf producers make the decision or more informed decision, should I sell my calves at weaning versus enroll them in some kind of post-weaning vaccination program. And the simple example would be versus selling a weaning, you could put them in something like a VAC 45 program, right? So vaccination program, hold them for 45 days post-weaning before you sell. There's several of those types of programs out there. Well, the economist in me points out that's a margin decision. So you project what you expect to sell the calf for at weaning and compare that at what you would sell it for at a later date, heavier weight, but higher cost because you have additional medicine cost and honing ship cost, so forth, and you compare those two outcomes. So to paraphrase, basically, that is what this Excel tool does. It walks you through, it asks you to update, what is your cost structure, how much does it cost you to run a calf for the day, what's your labor cost per day, all those kind of things are inputs, and we have defaults in there, kind of best guess starting points. But listeners that have an interest in this that know their own cost will be an advantage because they could fine-tune the tool to their own situation. And then it is informed by, maybe part of the unique aspect of this is Dr. Renner and I have been working with Merck Animal Health and Superior Livestock Auctions data. So we have 2020 video auction data that allowed us to estimate the sales price differentials for cattle sold, for example, in a VAC 45 program versus at weaning or no claim. Same thing for VAC 60, VAC Precon. There's a whole suite of those kind of programs. And those estimates are in the background underneath this tool. I highlight that because the goal is not only to provide a useful tool today, right? And that's why we're kind of announcing it now. I hope producers can use this, especially as we get out to the fall when the bulk of calves become weaned and this becomes a common decision for producers. Do your homework now is the point of that comment. But I also hope annually, as long as this partnership exists and we have access to update those estimates, the market is going to adjust as well. So the premium that the market will pay for VAC 60 compared to weaning, there's no reason to believe that's going to be the same for 10 years in a row. So we will update that to the extent we have data access and we're able to, and keep that tool annually current is kind of the broader vision. But, I'll back up to the really basic to remind everybody. The point is to give producers a decision aid so they can make a more informed decision on the expected return of enrolling your calves in one of these post-weaning programs versus sell at weaning. And the answer to that will depend on your situation and your willingness to basically be exposed to the market for a longer period of time. So it's not a black or white, simple yes, no for everybody. This tool is designed to help a producer fine-tune it and get a more informed decision for their situation.
But to maximize the usefulness of this, producers have to have their numbers in a row, so to speak, have to have pretty good records on what those VAC programs are costing them, if in fact they've been employing them.
Yep, that's certainly best. It's not the first time I've ever said, and I'm not the inventor of this phrase, but you can't manage what you don't measure. I mean, if you don't know your cost, it's hard to optimize your operation. That's nothing new, and it holds here as well. That said, even if you don't know your own cost structure as well as some of us would like you to, this tool has what we think are decent defaults. You could still make a more informed decision than you would maybe without the tool. And maybe that is the bait to, hone in and start to get a better handle on your labor cost or your feed cost or whatever that issue would be. So yes, it is an advantage to have a better handle on your cost situation. But I think even marginally we can improve decision making for those that might have basic but not complete cost records.
You can find this tool by name CAF Vaccination Program Assessment Tool at agmanager.info. And if you haven't pinned down the costs and returns of those calf vaccination programs in your operation, this is an excellent way to do just that. agmanager.info. Check that out. We'll finish here today, Glynn, by looking at what you're describing as changes in the beef packing sector and some actual growth in capacity, it sounds. You might explain.
Yeah, there's been several announcements, and I think it's worth thinking through kind of the timing and the impact of this. But to remind everybody, there's been a lot of industry discussion about the amount of packing capacity we have relative to the number of cattle at any one point in time. That is always evolving. I'll remind folks of that. But I put notes here. There's a couple of recent announcements that lead us to have this discussion. Maybe the most immediately relevant for most of our listeners is a group is planning or has announced a new plant in North Platte, Nebraska. The announcements, as I've read them at least, is targeting a 2023 operation schedule and would come in at about 1,500 head per day. That is not a small plant, but it's not as large as some of the largest plants either. I mean, I put that in kind of the medium-sized category. These plants are expensive. That's going to be a brand new one. That differs from another announcement, which is actually National Beef announced at the Tama, Iowa plant. They're going to basically add a second shift. So that will almost double the capacity, push that plant's combined new operation up to 2,500 head per day. And they have a stated late 2022 completion date in mind. And then there's been two separate announcements actually in Idaho. So for those that are tracking me, these are different geographic regions, but two different announcements in Idaho that are each coming in at 500 head per day. One of those is a combo beef and bison plant, so it's a little more flexible, so to speak. If you add up all that, I'm reminding us these announcements have the potential to add, maybe 4,000 head of processing per day to the industry. That probably understates the total because there's a lot of other small announcements, 50 head per day type plants that are, being talked about and added on. This isn't surprising to me because lots of commentary about quote unquote packers margins relative to, cattlemen producers returns is embedded in some of this. But I also want to not just make the announcements known to our listeners, but remind folks that relationship between packing capacity and the number of cattle is always evolving. We tend to change the cattle supply situation a lot more than we do the number of plants or the plant capacity because most of these plants are put up. They're multi-decade investments. The bulk of packing sector today was built in the 70s. It's multiple decades old. These are examples of new plants and expansions. But, we've had plants that have closed. Some of our listeners will remember 2013, Cargill closed the Plainview, Texas plant. At the time, it was processing 4,500 head per day. You'd have to ask Cargill exactly why they did that, but I'm going to guess it had a lot to do at that point in time. We had, quote-unquote, excess capacity. We had a lot of packing capacity relative to cattle in the industry. I'm reminding folks of that to the point on this is ever evolving, and it also takes time to add a new plant or add another shift. We're not going to hit this capacity next week. That's why I added the 2023 and 2022 notes to our comments. But it is worth tracking and appreciating the fact it's ever evolving.
You asked the question, though, as you look at this, you say, as far as expanding packing capacity, whether new plants are the most economically advantageous as opposed to actually adding a second shift to existing plants.
Yep. And I think there's some arguments both ways, and there's room to succeed both ways, but they're different models. So the Tama plant, as an example, is one where we're talking about adding a second shift. The pro of doing that is, that's an existing plant within an existing company that already has business relationships, right? Whether it's for exporting certain products and so forth. In some sense, you could expand production maybe without having to double, the HR and managerial staff and so forth. So maybe there's some efficiencies that come with just, kind of pushing the throughput through an existing plant a little harder. Of course, you have to add cold storage space and so forth. So it's not simple, no-brainer, but there's some efficiencies that come with that. However, you tend to be constrained to the existing footprint and design of a plant when you add a second shift. Conversely, so if you go and put a brand new plant up, which is what's being proposed in North Platte most recently, you have the opportunity to bring in the most modern, maybe more automated and less labor dependent, potentially, right? Because when you build a new plant, you got the opportunity to do that. The net of those two is going to be worth watching going forward, and whether or not that changes the overall efficiencies one way or the other in the industry, and therefore how efficient we are, right, of converting live animals into meat and the ultimate meat prices consumers receive and so forth, is worth monitoring. My main point today is we're managing to expand capacity some, but we're doing it in two very different ways, and it will be very instructive to watch what the net economic impact of that is in 3 or 5 years when we look back at that.
And you, as a livestock economist here at K-State, you say have your hand in a number of related efforts regarding the packing capacity and the packing sector in general.
Yeah, so the topic is top of mind in lots of circles. So myself, Lee Schultz is another collaborator our listeners are used to hearing from. We have multiple ongoing efforts in this space, and I want to give credit to Lee to a specific point here, which relates to what we're talking about, is the difference between physical capacity and operational capacity. So most of what we talked about in the last few minutes is adding physical capacity, adding additional bricks and mortar, concrete hooks, so forth. Well, that itself is not sufficient to actually harvest cattle and produce beef products. You need that and it for it to be operational. And look back to the COVID experience, we had lots of plants that were not able to run the same way as we envisioned, largely because of labor challenges, right? The availability of labor, putting protocols and spacing them out and slowing throughput. That disconnect at times between physical and operational capacity, the ability to fully use your plant is what we're alluding to, is really important. And it's not obvious that we always need to add X% more physical capacity. Sometimes there's a lot gained by just regaining operational capacity, and at times that is what's most prudent. That's really important to appreciate.
Glynn, thanks for covering all of this with us. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension, that's Glynn Tonsor. And you're tuned to Agriculture Today. More shortly for you here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines. These courtesy in part of DTN. The House has approved 2 bills to address immigration issues, one that would provide a path to citizenship for about 2.5 million undocumented immigrants, that on a vote of 228 to 197. 9 Republicans voting in favor of that bill. A second measure, one passage, 247 to 174. It would provide a path to citizenship for farm workers in the country illegally and their family members. 30 Republicans voting for that bill. The farm worker measure was approved by the House back in 2019, but was not acted on by the Senate then. The Farm Workforce Modernization Act, as it's called, provides for some agricultural workers in the country illegally to receive a temporary legal status if they've worked at least 180 days in the last 2 years. The bill would also modernize the H-2A temporary agricultural worker program, making year-round H-2A visas available for the first time. The outlook remains uncertain as these measures face steep odds in the evenly divided Senate. Republicans are becoming increasingly opposed to any new immigration measures. That's a situation accented by the worsening situation at the U.S. southern border. The U.S. is on a pace to see the largest number of migrants crossing into the country illegally in 2 decades, according to Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The USDA has named its first Farm Service Agency administrator of Native American descent. Here's more from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
Zach Deschanel is USDA's first Native American Farm Service Agency administrator.
I am a member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. We're located within South Dakota, and I grew up on a cattle and quarter horse operation.
He has extensive experience for the job.
I come to the position very well versed in the farm loan program side, as a lot of the work that I did with my former employer, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, centered around assisting producers with farm loan program applications, financing, refinancing their operation.
The council represents all federally recognized tribes and serves 80,000 Native American producers. Meanwhile, he looks forward to working with all stakeholders
to bring their perspective to the initiatives that the administration has put out there. Climate smart agriculture, equity in all of our programs, recovery from the pandemic, and ensuring efficient service.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, producers waiting to hear about the aid programs from the USDA likely will have to wait until April for the Biden administration to complete its reviews and release funds. The administration still reviewing the last farm aid programs initiated by the Trump administration, as well as developing the programs that would come from 2 separate aid packages, the aid bill from last December and the new aid package passed earlier this month. It will be sometime in the next couple of weeks before the USDA announces the end of its reviews for CFAP assistance, CFAP AA, according to the Farm Service Agency's new administrator, Zach Deschanel. The USDA has provided $23 billion to producers through those, most of which were released during the Trump administration. To keep the enrollment going, especially following the February storms, the USDA extended the deadline for CFAP AA, which is now open-ended until the USDA announces any program changes. For now, the USDA is assessing which producers have fallen through the cracks in aid, while also reaching out to farm groups and assessing the requests from Congress for aid to certain producers. Iowa's congressional delegation earlier this month calling on the USDA to include custom feeders in the CFAP AA, for instance. And sign up for the provisions of the December aid package also has yet to be announced. That includes language providing $20 per acre payments for non-specialty crop producers based on 2020 planted acres. Another provision of that bill provides nearly $1 billion in support for dairy producers. And the bill also included a provision for livestock producers that reimbursed up to 80% of losses due to euthanizing animals when the supply chains were backed up last year by the interruptions of the pandemic. A set of agricultural nutrient stewardship practices are being further enhanced through the continued research and innovations. A look at that from the USDA's Rod Bain.
You may be familiar with the Ag Nutrient Stewardship Protocol called the 4 R's.
Using the right source of nutrient at the right rate, the right time, and the right place.
Yet as Laura Moody of the Fertilizer Institute explained at this year's USDA Agricultural Outlook Forum, the protocol is not one, but rather a suite of sustainability practices designed to reach preferred outcomes within the 4R system.
All geared towards increasing productivity and economics on the farm while minimizing nutrient loss so that we can address impacts to water and air quality.
Think practices and tools ranging from soil sampling to variable rate equipment. She adds the 4 R's are being further enhanced via ag innovations in development or now being used, such as enhanced efficiency fertilizers.
We continue to fine-tune and increase not only our knowledge about those products, but innovate and find new ways that we can further enhance those products for the farm's outcome.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And major crop commodities from Canada and upper Midwest states will have new ways to export through the Gulf of Mexico and into Mexico itself, with the announcement yesterday by the Canadian Pacific Railway that it has agreed to buy the Kansas City Southern Railroad for $25 billion in value. This merger will provide direct rail service throughout Canada down to central Mexico and key agricultural and manufacturing hubs throughout the center of the U.S. The executives from the two railroads highlighted the merger, saying that it would create the first U.S.-Mexico-Canada rail network, furthering the ties of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. The combined railroad would be called the Canadian Pacific Kansas City, and under the deal, Calgary, Alberta would be the global headquarters, Kansas City, Missouri would be the U.S. headquarters. Looking at the individual sectors, the Executive Vice President of Canadian Pacific, John Brooks, called the prospects for agricultural exports a game changer in terms of what the combination is going to do. Grain commodities account for about 1/4 of CP's volume and revenue. Brooks said that CP's production-rich origins, as he put it, will now have new opportunities for both exports and domestic shipping. And he later added it would shift some of CP's agricultural flow from relying solely on Pacific Northwest ports. In 2020, CP shipped about 1.2 billion bushels of grain. That was the most in that railroad's history. That's a look at today's top stories in agricultural news. Our weekly 4-H segment comes your way next. Jeff Wickman has that here on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Now that spring has arrived and the days are getting warmer and longer, Kansas 4-H youth are being encouraged to spend some additional time working on their current 4-H projects through research, challenges, or interviewing someone with expertise in their project area. In addition, it's a good time to think about other project areas they might want to explore in the future. Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw says there are a variety of online resources on the 4-H website to help youth get the most out of their projects, including the Club Corner, Clover Classroom, and Library. Beth, as we think about spring, we also think about a time to clean things out, but it's also a time to maybe clean things up in terms of some of the projects that the youth have been working on. Spring break in particular, a great time to kind of reassess where they are and make plans to move forward.
Yes, we definitely want any of our young people who have a spring break, if they've got the time, we would love for them to really do some thinking about their projects. Spring break and just spring in general, gives us an opportunity to just kind of plan what it is that we want to get done for the rest of the year. And so, during that spring break, our suggestion is, you might research on your project some, review any of the available curriculum or resources, and then another option might be, if it's safe, in-person field trips, or there's a number of places that are doing virtual field trips right now as well. So there's just some really great opportunities to get things planned to work into our project work.
Well, I know 4-H has a number of project areas, and therefore a lot of youth are looking for a lot of different information. You mentioned the research aspect. How do they tackle that? Is that something they can do online, or are they looking for other resources? What type of things are available?
We encourage everybody to go to our Kansas 4-H website, which is www.kansas4h.org. And right in the middle of the page, you'll see something that says projects. And that's near the top under a picture. And if you click on any of those categories, you can actually look at all the different projects that we have. And what I think is really great is one of the things that we've had a number of staff working on this past year are project learning sheets. And so young people can actually go to the project and look at the project learning sheet, and it'll have ideas for them. It's great because there's some ideas, so you're a beginner, or if you're an intermediate, or you're advanced. And it also has, things you might want to explore, or things you might want to learn, or things you might want to practice, or things you might want to experience. And then in addition to that, it lists the resources and events that might be available for that project, curriculum that's available, any record keeping that's available, and some project exhibit ideas as well. And we have one of these sheets for almost all of our projects. We're getting very close to being 100% on those.
So if someone was in geology or something like that, they could go and they could find a sheet that might give them some ideas?
Yes, that's exactly right. And, sometimes when you're, advanced in the project, you may already have your idea. But when you're new to it, it's really helpful to kind of have this roadmap of what you might be able to do. And, the other thing, in addition to the project sheets, we also have some project challenges. And so those would be great as well. And I think those have been covered other times on your radio program. But those project challenges would also provide young people an introductory activity in some of those different projects.
All of this is designed to help them gain the knowledge they need in that project area?
Most definitely. One of the things that we talk about with the project is this idea of the project pathway. And, that's starting in something that is a spark for young people, something that they're very interested in, and then gaining knowledge and mastery as they continue in that, and then possibly even some career direction with that project that they're involved in. We know that there are career skills that young people will learn in every project, whether that specific subject matter is their career or not. But we also know that young people who have that opportunity to really explore their spark and really master some content, that is a wonderful start for them in a career if that's what they choose.
So someone who might be interested in becoming a veterinarian might see if they can maybe spend a day shadowing a veterinarian in their area, something like that. Would that be something they could do?
Definitely. That would certainly be a great project experience. Maybe there's a project leader who's a veterinarian, or maybe there's somebody in your community who's a good 4-H supporter who could be a mentor for you. Certainly there's other kinds of research that could be completed about veterinary science as well. We don't have a specific veterinary science project in Kansas 4-H, but a number of young people learn some of those skills through their animal science projects. And I've also seen young people who really have that spark take that as a self-determined project as well.
And then part of this also is connecting with people who maybe are in that project area, and you can do an interview. You could either do that in person or virtually if you had to.
Most definitely. We think it's great for young people to start seeing the possibilities in those career areas or in those project areas. And again, it may spark them toward a career, or it might just, help them have deeper learning in the project while they're enrolled right now.
So again, if people want more information on this, all of the information is available online, and they can find that pretty easy to follow through. You really set it up nicely for them to be able to accomplish this in kind of a 1, 2, 3 manner.
Most definitely. And, all of those things are available on our web. And so we would love for people to come and take part in them. And we will have a link also on the web for those project challenges.
That's Southeast Area Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist Beth Hinshaw discussing the importance of continuing to work on 4-H projects this spring. If you'd like more information about the project areas being offered, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.